The November rain came down like a blade wrapped in ice, and Clara Winters did not feel it anymore. She had stopped feeling most things 6 months ago: the cold, the hunger, the weight of her manager's hand on her shoulder, the sting of being called useless in front of customers who left no tips. What she felt now was only the trembling of a child against her ribs and the knowledge that she had $5 to her name and nowhere to go. The scooter had finally died. It sat 3 blocks behind her, abandoned on the sidewalk like a broken promise, and Clara stood alone in front of the Meridian Hotel with her one umbrella, patched at the edges with duct tape, held high over a small girl's head. The girl could not have been more than 6 years old. Her white dress was soaked mud-brown at the hem. Her fever burned so hot that Clara could feel the heat radiating from her small body even through layers of wet clothing, and the child's breathing came in short, shallow gasps like she was drowning on dry land. "Stay still, sweetheart," Clara whispered, though the girl was not moving. "Just stay still. The rain will stop soon." It would not stop soon. The forecast called for 12 more hours of this downpour, and Clara knew this because she had checked the weather on a library computer 2 days ago, trying to plan her delivery routes, trying to squeeze every dollar out of every shift. But lying to a sick child felt like the most honest thing she had done in months. A black car idled at the corner. Tinted windows. Engine running so quietly that most people would not have noticed it. But Clara had learned to notice things: the way men in expensive suits looked at women like her, the way certain cars pulled up to certain corners, the way the world divided itself into people who mattered and people who could disappear. Inside that black car, Vincent Corsetti leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed on the rain-soaked girl standing on the curb. He had been searching for 3 hours. 3 hours through Boston's November streets, through hospitals and schools and the homes of his daughter's friends, through the kind of frantic searching that breaks powerful men into pieces. Lily had fever dreams that morning. By noon, she was gone. His ex-wife's new boyfriend had taken her to the park. The boy had looked away for 1 moment. 1 moment was all the world needed to steal what he had built his entire empire to protect. Vincent's hands gripped the leather armrest so hard his knuckles went white. His driver, Marco, loyal for 19 years, steady as a stone, kept his eyes on the road and did not speak. There were things that could not be said when Vincent Corsetti was this close to the edge of control. Then the car turned the corner onto Meridian Street, and everything stopped. The girl was sitting on the curb outside the restaurant where Vincent sometimes conducted business in the back booth. She was sitting in the rain. But she was not alone. A woman stood over her, young, maybe mid-20s, though poverty and exhaustion had carved lines into her face that belonged to someone twice her age. She was soaked completely through. Her jacket hung like a wet rag from her shoulders. Her hair was plastered to her skull. And she held her umbrella over the crying child like she was the most precious thing in the entire world. The girl was not crying anymore. She was just trembling and breathing and looking up at the woman with the kind of trust that only comes when someone puts your survival before their own comfort. Marco's breath caught. He had worked for Vincent Corsetti for nearly 2 decades. He had seen the man negotiate peace treaties between rival families. He had seen him order men to disappear. He had seen him walk into situations that should have killed him and walk out untouched. But Marco had never, in 19 years, seen the boss move the way he moved now. Vincent was already out of the car before it fully stopped. The rain hammered against his black cashmere coat, a coat that cost more than Clara's entire year of rent, though she would never know this. His shoes were Italian leather. His watch was platinum. Everything about him spoke of a world that operated by different rules, where power moved through the air like a scent and doors opened without knocking. But when he knelt down in the rain next to Lily, his movements were slow and gentle, and his voice, when he spoke, came out barely above a whisper. "Mio amore," he said. "My love." Lily's eyes widened. "Papa." He pulled her against his chest and held her there like she might dissolve if he let go. The rain fell harder. His expensive coat grew darker with water. His hands shook as he ran them over her hair, her shoulders, checking for injuries, finding only fever and fear and his own daughter who was alive and breathing and here. Clara stepped back. She held the umbrella steady, though her arms were shaking now, though the cold had finally penetrated the layers of numbness she wrapped around herself every day. She watched the man, this man made of angles and danger, this man whose presence seemed to push the rain away, hold the child like she was the only thing that mattered. Like all his power, all his money, all his control meant nothing compared to this one sick girl who was calling him Papa. She was so brave, Clara said quietly. She did not cry. She was brave the whole time. Vincent turned to look at her. His eyes were dark and still, like a storm before it breaks. He was studying her face, taking in the bruises on her throat that her wet collar could not hide, the exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes, the way she stood in the rain without moving even now that she had given up her umbrella to him. "What is your name?" His voice was quiet, controlled, but something underneath it vibrated like a threat. "Clara," she said. "Clara Winters." He stood up slowly, Lily still in his arms, and he looked at this girl, this nobody, this person who had just arrived at the most important moment of his life and done the one thing that mattered. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has just handed him back his entire world. "Marco," he said without turning around. "Take note of her face. Find out everything about her. Where she works. Where she lives. Every detail." "Yes, sir," Marco said from the car. But what Clara did not know was that in exactly 30 minutes, 50 black limousines would begin arriving at this corner. She did not know that a man had just ordered his most trusted lieutenant to investigate her entire life. She did not know that standing in the rain, holding an umbrella over a stranger's child, she had just made a choice that would divide her life into before and after, the way lightning splits the sky. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how Clara Winters ended up standing alone in the rain with only $5 in her pocket and a scooter that would not start. 6 months earlier, Clara had walked through the doors of the Meridian Hotel on the first day of spring, carrying a backpack with 3 changes of clothes and a degree in business administration that meant absolutely nothing to anyone who mattered. The degree was half finished. The university had given her an incomplete in her final semester because she could not pay the last tuition bill, $8,000 that might as well have been $8 million. She had done everything right. Perfect grades. Work-study. Part-time jobs. And still, she had come up short. Harold Brennan had interviewed her in his cramped office on the 2nd floor. He was a man of 48 with slicked-back hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes. His suit was expensive but not expensive enough to hide the sweat stains at his collar. He kept one hand on his desk and the other on his lap, and he looked at Clara the way a predator looks at something small and wounded. "You'll start immediately," he had said. "Double shifts. 5:30 a.m. to 3 a.m. You'll take the orders, clear the tables, and you'll smile while you do it. Smile big. The customers like that." She had smiled big. She had smiled so big her face hurt by the end of the first week. By the end of the second week, she had realized that her paychecks were smaller than they should be. By the end of the first month, she understood that Harold Brennan was stealing. Not just dollars, he was stealing the fractional amounts. 75 cents here. $2 there. Tips that customers left on tables, money that belonged to her, going into his pocket instead. She had raised her hand in the break room and asked about it politely. She had said, "I think there might be an error with my tips." Harold Brennan had cornered her in the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the walk-in freezer. He had put his hand on her shoulder. His fingers had dug into her muscle in a way that was not quite violent but promised violence. "You don't talk about the money," he had said. His breath smelled like cigarettes and whiskey even though it was only 9 in the morning. "You don't ask about the money. You don't call the owner. You don't call the labor board. You understand me." She had understood him. Every day for 6 months, Clara had arrived at 5:15 a.m. and left at 3:36 a.m., pulling almost 18 hours of work, and she had received paychecks that would not have covered the rent on a room in a building where the roof did not leak. She lived in one now, a room that cost $380 a month in a boarding house in Dorchester where the pipes froze in winter and the shower worked on Tuesdays if you were lucky. Her financial situation looked like this: she owed the university $8,000. She owed the doctor $4,700 for the emergency room visit when she had passed out from dehydration 6 weeks ago. She owed her landlord rent that was now 3 months behind because she had used the money to buy textbooks for her night classes. She had $5 in her checking account and maybe $2 in change at the bottom of her backpack. The balance on her credit card was maxed out at $2,200, which she had used for groceries and gas money and the deposit on her current room. Every single night, she sat at the desk in her room and looked at this math. $5 plus nothing equals nothing. $5 minus any expense equals negative numbers. She had learned to think in negative numbers. This was what her life had become. But she had kept going to night classes at Boston University 3 times a week. She sat in the back of business seminars and took notes on used paper and told herself that this was temporary. That the degree would get her out. That someday she would have a job where her boss did not touch her, where the money she earned was actually hers, where she could walk into a restaurant and order something that cost more than her entire daily food budget. She had believed in someday. Then November came, and the rain started, and the scooter, the 15-year-old Honda scooter that she had inherited from her roommate when the roommate had finally saved enough money to leave Boston, began making a sound like a dying animal. Metal grinding on metal. The spark plug was failing. The battery was corroded. She had tried to fix it herself with tools borrowed from a neighbor and YouTube videos watched on borrowed Wi-Fi at the library, but some things cannot be fixed with prayer and duct tape and desperation. Now it sat abandoned 3 blocks away, and Clara stood in the rain with $5 in her pocket and everything she owned in a backpack that weighed almost nothing because she owned almost nothing. The rain tasted like salt and exhaust. The November wind cut through her jacket like a blade through butter. And somewhere in the darkness, a man in a black car was changing the entire architecture of her life, one whispered order at a time. The Meridian Hotel restaurant kitchen blazed with heat and fluorescent light, the kind of brightness that erased shadows and exposed everything. It was 6 in the evening on a November night when the rain had turned from drizzle to downpour, when the city's gutters overflowed and the streets became rivers of grey water and fallen leaves. Clara Winters stood in the corner of the kitchen, peeling off her soaked jacket, and her manager Harold Brennan stood at the register counting money. Not the restaurant's money. Her money. 3 20s. A 10. A 5. He slipped them into his pocket with the casual movement of a man who had done this so many times it no longer required thought. "Excuse me," Clara said. Her voice came out small, barely a whisper above the hum of the exhaust hood. "Those were my tips from lunch service." Harold Brennan did not look up. He was 45 years old, the kind of man whose body had already begun its surrender to time, thinning hair slicked back with something that smelled chemical and wrong, a belly that pushed against his white dress shirt, a wedding ring on his left hand and marks on his right wrist where another ring used to sit. He continued counting the remaining bills on the counter with the focused attention of someone engaged in something sacred. "You were late yesterday," he said, still not turning. His voice carried no emotion, which made it worse. Emotion would have implied he was making a choice. This was simply fact to him, as unchangeable as gravity. "I was not late. I arrived at 5:47 for a 6 o'clock shift." Clara pulled out her phone, scrolled to her messages, found the time stamp of her arrival text to her roommate. "I was 13 minutes early." Harold finally turned. He looked at her the way a man looks at an insect he has just noticed crawling across his dinner plate. Not with anger. Not with disgust. With nothing. Absolute nothing. "Consider it a punctuality fee," he said, and returned to the register. "You have tables waiting. Section 4 is yours tonight." The walk-in freezer at the back of the kitchen exhaled cold like a living thing. Shelves lined with white boxes of vegetables, proteins wrapped in brown paper, bags of frozen fries stacked in pyramids that occasionally collapsed without warning. It was here, at 11 in the evening, that Harold Brennan trapped her? The kitchen had cleared out except for Marcus on dish pit, and Marcus wore headphones that blocked out everything except the music thundering through his skull. The freezer door swung closed behind them and the fluorescent panel inside flickered, creating a strobe effect that made the scene feel like it was happening in fragments, in pieces that did not quite add up. "You could make this easier on yourself," Harold said. His voice was different in here, lower, more intimate. The kind of voice a man uses when he believes no one else is listening. "Be nicer to management. Show some appreciation for the opportunity you have been given." His hand landed on her shoulder. The cold was so intense that her jacket felt thin as paper, like it was offering no protection at all. His fingers pressed down, and she felt the weight of him, the bulk of his body, the assumption in that touch, the certainty that she would accept it because she had nowhere else to go. Because a girl with $5 in her bank account and no family in the city did not turn down a man who controlled whether she got paid next Friday. Clara pulled away. She moved fast, stepping sideways, her back hitting a shelf of frozen vegetables. The cold burned. "Do not touch me again," she said. Harold smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just been given permission to escalate, who had learned through decades of small violations that women like Clara, young, poor, alone, would not fight back in ways that mattered. "Be careful," he said, and his voice dripped with something like venom. "I have 3 applications on my desk from girls who would not complain. Girls who would be grateful for this job. You understand what I am saying to you?" She understood. At 2 in the morning, Clara sat on a mattress on the floor of her apartment and stared at her phone's banking app. $5. The number glowed on the screen like a verdict. $5 plus nothing equaled nothing. $5 minus rent, which was due in 6 days, equaled $695 in debt. The radiator in the corner of the room had stopped working in September, and she had called the landlord 7 times. He had not responded. She wore 2 sweaters while she studied, worn textbooks spread across the mattress. Principles of Financial Analysis. Introduction to Business Management. Accounting Fundamentals. The words on the pages felt like languages she was trying to learn while drowning. The cracked helmet sitting by the door was a reminder of the scooter's end. The metal grinding sound it had made 3 days ago. The way it had finally seized, refused to start, condemned itself to sit abandoned on Amory Street where she had left it. She had looked at it for 5 minutes before walking away, knowing she would not be going back for it. The bike cost $300 to fix, according to the mechanic she could not afford to visit. She had not visited him. She had simply walked away. But Vincent Corsetti sat in his office at the shipping warehouse in Dorchester, the kind of office that occupied the entire top floor of a converted textile factory, and he reviewed a handwritten list that Carlo had brought him 20 minutes earlier. The list contained names. Below each name, a number. Below each number, a date. The dates were old. The numbers were large. The names belonged to men who had promised payment and then promised again and then made excuses, and Vincent had exhausted his patience for excuses sometime during the George W. Bush administration. He was 38 years old and he looked like a man who had lived several lifetimes in that span. Dark eyes that had seen violence the way other people saw traffic. A scar running from his right eye to his cheekbone, pale and thin like a blade someone had drawn across his face with surgical precision. He wore a suit that cost more than Clara's entire monthly rent, charcoal with a barely visible weave that caught the light like water. His hands, folded on the desk in front of the list, were not the hands of a man who spent his time in offices. They were scarred. They told stories. "This debt," Vincent said, his voice deep and solid like an oath, "belongs to who?" Carlo stood across from him. Carlo was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of muscular build that came from disciplined violence rather than accident. "James Morrison. Runs a numbers operation in Roxbury. He claims the business had a bad month. Claims he needs 2 weeks. 2 weeks is what?" Vincent asked. $300,000, Carlo said. Vincent looked back at the list. He did not speak for a long time. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, Boston sprawled out in grids of light. Each light represented a person. Each person had debts of their own, money owed to banks, favors owed to friends, promises made to people who depended on them. The city was built on debt. He had simply built his empire on collecting it. When Vincent was 17 years old, a rival named Dominic Salerno walked into his father's office with 2 men and a silencer and put 2 bullets in his father's chest while Vincent hid in a supply closet and listened to the man drown in his own blood. The sound had stayed with him for 21 years. It was there even now, underneath the hum of the office air conditioner and the sound of Carlo breathing and the distant traffic from the street below. His father had been helpless. His father had been in his own office and he had been helpless. Vincent had built his empire on the promise that this would never happen again, that no one under his protection would ever hide in a closet and listen to their own death approaching. But at that same hour, in a different part of the city, Cordelia Blackwood sat in a mahogany office at the Four Seasons and reviewed financial statements on her laptop screen. She was 53 years old and she had learned decades ago that the most dangerous thing in the world was not a man with a gun but a woman with money. Money could buy guns. Money could buy silence. Money could buy judges and police and journalists and politicians. Money could buy the erasure of evidence, the rewriting of history, the destruction of a life without leaving a single fingerprint behind. She was the silent owner of the Meridian Hotel. Harold Brennan was her puppet. A useful puppet, certainly. He was good at running day-to-day operations, at keeping guests happy, at maximizing profit, but a puppet nonetheless. She controlled the board. She controlled the leases. She controlled the future of the building, which she had been planning to liquidate and convert into luxury apartments that would displace exactly 35 employees and generate $7 million in profit. That was where Clara Winters became a problem. Cordelia had seen the girl. Had noticed her about 6 weeks ago when she made an unannounced visit to the restaurant. The girl was young, efficient, had the kind of eyes that suggested she was thinking about something other than tables and tip percentages. Cordelia had made inquiries. Had learned that Clara was studying business at night, that she had been accepted into the full program for the spring semester, that she was poor but driven. The kind of person who built things rather than inherited them. The kind of person who might, eventually, become a threat. Cordelia had called Harold 3 weeks ago and given him very specific instructions. Make her stay late. Make her uncomfortable. Make her understand that the world was not designed for girls with empty bank accounts and ambitious ideas. She had been patient, watching through a private investigator's reports, noting the way Clara's shoulders had begun to curve inward, the way her paychecks had become shorter. In 2 weeks, with the right pressure, Clara would either break or run. Either way, she would be gone. Cordelia did not know that on this very night, in the rain that was turning to ice, everything was about to change. The rain fell harder at midnight. Clara stood at the kitchen window of the restaurant, watching the parking lot become a mirror. Her shift had ended an hour ago, but Harold had ordered her to stay and help with inventory in the walk-in. She had refused. She had said the word no and watched his face darken and then brighten again with a kind of false calm that was somehow worse than anger. Then you will not be scheduled next week, he had said. She needed the paycheck. She had not eaten since breakfast. She had stayed. Now the inventory was finished and she was leaving, walking out into the November night with her jacket soaked through and her shoes coming apart at the sole. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. The bus came every 40 minutes. If she missed it, she would have to wait in the cold, and the cold was becoming dangerous. She could feel it settling into her bones like something that wanted to live there. What she did not know was that James Morrison, the man who owed Vincent Corsetti $300,000, had decided to solve his problem by taking something Vincent had not yet realized he valued. What she did not know was that somewhere in the darkness, in the back of a black sedan idling on a side street 2 blocks away, a man named Rico was making a phone call and reporting a location and waiting for instructions. What she did not know was that the umbrella she had seen in the restaurant, the one someone had left in the lost and found, would save a life tonight, and that single act of kindness to a stranger would set off a cascade of events that would transform her life from a slow death into something she had never dared to imagine. None of this was visible. The rain just fell. The wind just howled. Clara Winters just walked toward the bus stop, counting the blocks, counting the minutes until she could get somewhere warm, counting the money in her pocket even though she had counted it 17 times already. $5. That was all she had. But in 30 minutes, everything would change. The Starlight Diner smelled like 30 years of grease burned into the walls. Stale coffee. Burnt bacon. The kind of smell that sank into your clothes and never left. The neon sign in the window hummed, a sound like a dying insect trapped in glass, and cast everything in shades of pink and blue that made the checkered floor look like a chessboard from a fever dream. Clara stumbled through the door at 2:55 in the morning, her face a map of violence. Blood ran from where Harold Brennan's gold ring had split her cheek open. One eye was swelling shut, the skin around it turning colors that nature never intended, deep purple bleeding into sickly yellow at the edges. Around her throat, handprints bloomed like bruises that would take weeks to fade. Her ribs screamed when she breathed. One of his rings had caught her there too, drawing blood that had soaked through her uniform. She collapsed into a booth near the door. The waitress, name tag said Ruth, maybe 60 years old, blonde hair gone mostly gray, brought her a towel without being asked. Some people recognize a woman who has been hit. Ruth was one of them. She said nothing. She just set down a glass of water and a clean towel and walked away. The water trembled in the glass because Clara's hands would not stop shaking. In the back booth, Vincent Corsetti sat with Carlo and Theo. Vincent was tall, early 40s, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of a winter sky before a storm. His suit cost more than Clara's annual rent. His cufflinks were white gold. The scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone made him look like a man who had survived things that should have killed him. He was reviewing a handwritten list of debts, names, amounts, dates, with the focus of a general surveying a battlefield. Carlo was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, the kind of man whose knuckles had broken jaw and bone. Theo was leaner, scarred across his knuckles, with eyes that held the cold distance of someone who had pulled triggers in the dark. When the diner door opened and Clara fell through it like a wounded animal, Vincent looked up. For a moment, the world moved in slow motion. He saw her face. He saw the blood. He saw the way she held her ribs as if they might separate from her body if she breathed too hard. Something ancient and cold shifted in his chest, like the moment before an avalanche, when the mountain remembers what it is capable of. Carlo stood. Quote him, "We should tell her to leave." Vincent raised one hand. "No," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "Let her sit. Just watch." Ruth brought Clara a fresh towel. Clara pressed it to her face, but the bleeding did not slow. Her eye was closing. Soon she would not be able to see at all from that side. She sat there, shaking, trying to make her breathing slower. The clock on the wall ticked. 2:58. 2:59. At 3:12 in the morning, the diner door exploded open. Two men dragged a kid through it, 19 years old, maybe, with a pizza shop logo on his shirt. His face was already bruised. His left eye was swollen. His lip was split. The men holding him wore dark suits and the kind of expressions that made it clear they enjoyed their work. Carlo and Theo were on their feet instantly. The kid tried to run. He did not make it 3 feet. One of the men slammed him against the counter so hard the dishes rattled. The coffee in Ruth's pot sloshed and spilled across the burner, hissing like a curse. Carlo's voice came low and dangerous. Quote him, "You know what happens when you make Mr. Corsetti wait, Tony. 3 weeks. $1,500. Mr. Corsetti has been patient. Mr. Corsetti's patience is finished." The kid was crying. "I have it," he said, his voice breaking. "I almost have it. 1 more week, just give me." The man holding his right arm pulled back his fist. Vincent watched with the expression of someone watching paint dry. Disinterested. Already bored. Clara stood. She was bleeding. She was barely conscious. She had $5 in her pocket and nowhere to go. But she stood, and she walked between the kid and the man with the raised fist. Quote her voice trembling but steady, "Stop. Just stop. He is just a kid." Carlo stared at her like she had lost her mind. Like she had walked to the edge of a cliff and announced plans to fly. Quote Carlo, "Lady, you need to sit down and mind your business before business minds you." Clara did not move. Her hands shook. Her voice shook. But her eyes were steady. Quote Clara, "He is somebody's son. You want to beat somebody, you can start with me. I have already been hit once tonight. What is one more?" The diner went quiet. Absolutely, completely silent. Vincent rose from his booth. He was 6'1". He moved like something that had learned to move in the dark. Every step deliberate. Every movement a choice. When he stepped into the light near Clara, his face was calm, but his eyes had changed. They looked almost gentle now. Quote Vincent, "Who hurt you?" Clara blinked at him. The adrenaline was leaving her body now, and the exhaustion was coming in like a tide. She swayed. Her vision went grey at the edges. Vincent caught her before she fell. His hand on her arm was steady, and warm, and so careful that he held her like he was afraid she might shatter. His phone rang. He answered it without looking away from her. "Yes," he said. Then his face went white. The hand holding Clara's arm tensed. He said, "I am coming," and he ran. Carlo and Theo ran with him. The two men holding the kid looked at each other, confused, uncertain whether they should follow. They followed. Ruth was standing behind the counter, hands frozen mid-motion. She had seen a lot in 30 years of running a diner, but she had never seen a woman stand between armed men to protect a stranger, and she had never seen a powerful man move with such urgency. The kid looked at Clara. Quote him, "You stopped them. Why did you do that?" Clara could not answer. She did not know why. She just knew that someone smaller needed defending. She sat back down in her booth. Outside, the November rain fell like something with a purpose. Cold. Relentless. The kind of rain that reminded you that the world did not care whether you lived or died. 3 blocks away, in the darkness behind the Meridian Hotel, Lily Corsetti was sitting under an umbrella on a wet curb, shivering with fever. She was 6 years old. She had dark curly hair and her father's eyes. She was wearing a white dress that was soaked through, and she was crying because she had slipped away from her bed during a nightmare about her mother, the mother who had died 8 months ago in a car accident that was supposed to be for her father, and now she was lost and cold and very, very sick. The umbrella was not hers. A waitress had given it to her. The waitress had kind eyes and had said, "Wait right here, sweetie. Someone will come find you. Someone will come," and Lily believed her because sometimes you have to believe that kindness exists. She did not know that her father was about to move heaven and earth to find her. She did not know that 50 black limousines were about to roll through the streets of Boston like a convoy of darkness. She did not know that the woman who had given her the umbrella was about to change everything. She just sat under the umbrella in the rain, and she waited, because someone had told her that help was coming. And somewhere in the city, in an office on the 42nd floor of a building that bore no name on its directory, Cordelia Blackwood was reading a text message. She was 52 years old. She had old money and older cruelty. She owned the Meridian Hotel through shell companies and holding corporations designed to keep her name off every document and out of every liability. Harold Brennan was her creature. He was the way she bled money from the working poor and enjoyed their suffering from a distance. He took the tips. He stole the wages. He kept the people desperate enough to not fight back. And now she had just received a message that said 50 limousines had rolled up to her hotel. Cordelia smiled. It was not a kind smile. She picked up her phone and called Marcus, Vincent's head of security. When he answered, she did not introduce herself. She did not need to. Some people have enough power that they do not need introductions. Quote Cordelia, her voice smooth as poison, tell Mr. Corsetti that the girl is a liar and a thief. Harold Brennan is a decorated manager with 15 years of exemplary service. I have security footage of her stealing from the register. I have witnesses. If Mr. Corsetti continues this association with a known criminal, I will personally ensure that every news outlet in Boston knows that the infamous Vincent Corsetti is harboring thieves and ruining reputations to protect a girl who does not deserve protection. I have judges in my pocket, Mr. Marcus. I have connections he cannot touch. The girl will be destroyed by sunrise, and there is nothing he can do to stop it. She hung up. The rain kept falling on the city below, and nobody could hear it scream. The ballroom fell silent. 50 reporters, 36 cameras, and the weight of 1,000 flashing lights all focused on one podium where Cordelia Blackwood stood in a cream-colored suit that cost more than Clara Winters' entire wardrobe across 7 years of work. The silk draped like water. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it stretched the skin around her eyes. She was 52 years old and had the kind of beauty that came from never having denied herself anything, from a lifetime of taking what she wanted and leaving others to pick up the broken pieces. Harold Brennan stood beside her, his face scratched where Clara's fingernails had torn the skin, his expression carefully arranged into the shape of a man who had been wronged. Cordelia smiled. It was the smile of someone who had rehearsed this moment in a mirror until it looked genuine. "Good morning," she began, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "It breaks my heart to address this matter publicly, but justice demands truth. Last night, one of our employees, Clara Winters, violently attacked our manager Harold Brennan when he confronted her about stealing from the tip jar. She has since fled into the protection of known criminal Vincent Corsetti. I am offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to her arrest." The cameras flashed. The story went viral within 7 minutes. By the time Clara watched the press conference from Vincent's study, Cordelia's accusation had already spread across social media like poison through water. Her face, bruised, swollen, the desperation visible in her eyes from that moment at the diner, appeared on screens across Boston labeled with one word, thief. She stood at the window of the brownstone on Beacon Hill, her hands pressed flat against the cold glass. November rain streaked downward like tears. The sky was crying for her. 6 stories below, the city moved on. Cars passed. People walked. Nobody knew that everything Clara Winters had fought for, everything she had survived, was dissolving into nothing. The bruises on her throat had darkened to purple and black. The swelling around her left eye made it difficult to see. But those injuries, those marks that proved what Harold Brennan had done, meant nothing now. They meant nothing because Cordelia Blackwood had rewritten the story. She had taken the victim and made her the villain. She had taken the predator and made him the wounded party. Clara thought about the $5 remaining in her bank account. She thought about the scooter that would not start, parked 3 blocks away in an alley. She thought about the textbooks stacked on her apartment floor, criminology, business law, accounting, books she had bought with money she did not have because the degree was supposed to mean something. The degree was supposed to change her life. Instead, her face was on every news screen in Boston labeled violent. Criminal. Thief. She thought about her mother, who had died when Clara was 12 years old, who had held her hand in a hospital room and whispered, "Work hard, baby. Be good. Good people who work hard will be okay." It was a lie. It had always been a lie. Good people got crushed. Bad people won. There was no justice for girls with nothing, and Clara had been foolish to believe otherwise. The window was unlocked. 6 stories was enough. 6 stories meant she would not have to wake up tomorrow morning and see her face on the news again. 6 stories meant no more fear, no more fighting, no more pretending that her life was worth anything when the world had decided it was not. She opened the window. Cold rain hit her face like needles. The wind rose from the street below, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and car exhaust and the distant sound of a siren. Nobody would miss her. Nobody knew her. Even Vincent Corsetti would move on, would forget the delivery girl he had helped for one night out of boredom or pity or some code of honor that meant nothing in a world where lies won and truth died on live television. A small hand slipped into hers. Lily stood beside her in pajamas with stars printed across the fabric. She was 6 years old. She had already lost one mother. She had nightmares about abandonment. She held Clara's hand and looked up at her with eyes that still believed in people, that still believed in safety, that still believed in staying. "Are you sad?" Lily asked. Her voice was small and certain. "My mommy was sad before she went away." Clara's throat closed. She looked at this child who had seen loss, who knew what it meant to be left behind, who was still here, still trying, still reaching out to hold someone's hand in the dark. Clara closed the window. "I am okay, sweetheart," she said. Her voice broke on the word okay. "I am okay." But she was not okay. And Lily knew it. But Lily held her hand anyway. At midnight, Vincent Corsetti did not wait for the legal system to grind through its slow machinery. He did not wait for lawyers or judges or appeals. He picked up his phone and called Carlo. 12 men, Vincent said. Now. The raid on Harold Brennan's apartment in Alston moved with the precision of an operation that had been rehearsed 1,000 times. 12 men in black, dressed identically, moved like ghosts through the building. No forced entry. No drama. Just a picked lock and boots on carpet and the sudden awareness of 6 hands on a man's body pulling him awake. Harold Brennan's eyes snapped open to find Vincent Corsetti sitting in a chair beside his bed. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark hair silvered at the temples. Wearing a suit that cost more than Brennan's annual salary, with the kind of calm that only comes from years of absolute power. "You put your hands on someone under my protection," Vincent said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "That was a mistake." Brennan scrambled toward the door. Carlo filled the frame, his 6'3" frame blocking the only exit. Theo turned on every light in the apartment at once, and in that sudden brightness, Theo set Brennan's laptop on the mattress between them. The screen glowed with emails. Emails from Brennan to Cordelia detailing every woman he had assaulted. Every name. Every date. Every threat he had made. Every tip he had stolen. Every payment Cordelia had sent him for keeping the women quiet. Carlo was very good at finding secrets in places where people thought secrets were safe. Vincent did not touch Brennan. He did not need to. The presence of his body in the room was enough. "You are going to call a press conference tomorrow," Vincent said. "You are going to tell the truth about what you did to Clara Winters and the 4 women before her. You are going to name Cordelia Blackwood as your accomplice." Brennan's face went white. His hand shook. His breath came in short gasps. "She will destroy me," he whispered. "She has lawyers. She has judges." "She has?" Vincent leaned forward. "I have 12 men in this room and 100 more within 10 minutes. I have the emails you sent her. I have testimony from every woman you hurt. You can confess publicly and take your chances with the legal system, or you can refuse and I will make sure you disappear so completely that not even Cordelia's lawyers will find enough of you to bury. Choose." Brennan collapsed. He trembled like a cornered animal backed into the furthest corner of its cage. His body shook with sobs. His voice came out fractured and broken. "I will do it," he said. "I will tell them everything." The next morning, every news outlet in Boston received a call at 6 a.m. Press conference. 10 o'clock. The Meridian Hotel ballroom. Harold Brennan was finally telling the truth. The ballroom filled again, but this time the energy was different. The reporters sensed blood. They sensed that something had shifted, that the narrative was about to flip, that the story they had been fed was poison. Harold Brennan stood at the podium in a shirt stained with sweat. His hands gripped the edges so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked directly at the cameras. "Everything I said yesterday was a lie," he said. His voice shook. Clara Winters did not steal from the register. Clara Winters is the victim. I assaulted her. I stole her tips. I threatened her employment every time she tried to report me. I'm Cordelia Blackwood, the owner of this hotel, hidden behind shell corporations and lawyers. She knew. She knew everything, and she paid me to keep doing it. He named dates. He named other women. He showed the emails on a screen behind him, correspondence between himself and Cordelia discussing payment amounts and threats and the best ways to keep women terrified and quiet and compliant. The cameras flashed like lightning. Within 2 hours, FBI agents in windbreakers arrived at Cordelia Blackwood's mansion on Beacon Hill with federal warrants. They came at dawn. They came with cameras. They came in numbers that made clear this was not a casual inquiry. She was dragged out in a silk robe, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her face finally showing something other than that practiced smile. She showed fear. She showed rage. She showed the kind of absolute shock that comes when someone who believed herself untouchable finally understood that she could be touched after all. Federal charges. Conspiracy. Assault. Witness tampering. Racketeering. 40 years minimum. Her society friends turned away. Her charity boards issued statements disavowing her. Her lawyers could not save her when the evidence was this public, this viral, this overwhelming. Within 12 hours, every major news outlet in the country had picked up the story. By evening, Cordelia Blackwood's face was on every screen in America labeled with the words criminal. Predator. Destroyer. Justice is not death. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. Justice is watching everything you build burn on live television while the world cheers. 3 days after the confession went viral, the Meridian Hotel stood empty and condemned. The lobby was a tomb of abandoned elegance, chandeliers dark, registration desk vacant, the marble floor reflecting nothing but the grey light of a Boston winter pressing in through the tall windows. Police tape crossed the doorways. Investigators had finished their work. What remained was silence so complete it felt solid, like a weight pressing down on the building itself. Clara Winters stood outside in the rain, her umbrella the same cheap blue one she had carried for 2 years, the handle wrapped in electrical tape because the plastic had cracked. She wore the restaurant uniform still, the name tag reading Meridian Hotel already beginning to feel like something from another life. Water dripped from the umbrella's edge. Her hands were shaking, but not from cold. Vincent Corsetti stood beside her, close enough that his shadow fell across her in the grey light. He wore a charcoal overcoat that cost more than a month of what she used to earn, the fabric so fine it caught and held the rain like gemstones. His presence was absolute, the kind of stillness that makes the world around it seem to hold its breath. He had offered her money yesterday. $300,000. Enough to finish school. Enough to move into an apartment where the heater worked. Enough to never deliver food through November rain again. She had not accepted. "You should take it," he said. His voice was measured, without demand, the way someone speaks to a frightened animal they do not want to startle. Clara did not turn to look at him. She was staring at the hotel's entrance, at the place where Harold Brennan had been dragged away by federal agents that morning, his face destroyed by the realization that his world was ending. She had watched it happen on the news at the diner where she had found work 3 days ago. Watched her confession about his hands, his voice, his stolen tips being read aloud by every news anchor in New England. "I do not know how to be someone people save," she said. The rain intensified. She adjusted her grip on the umbrella's broken handle. "I only know how to survive." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the city moved, distant sirens, the rumble of the subway beneath their feet, a truck backing up somewhere on Hanover Street. But their small circle under her umbrella felt sealed off, a world made of rain and 2 people who barely knew each other. "You saved my daughter on a night when she was having seizures, and you did not even know her name," he said. The words came slowly, each one placed with precision. "You saved that delivery driver in the diner when Marco and Theo were roughing him up for a late payment, and you had nothing in your pockets but a $5 bill. You saved yourself when Brennan cornered you in the walk-in freezer, and you fought hard enough to get away." He paused, his dark eyes fixed on her face. "You do not need to learn how to be saved, Clara. You need to learn that survival and living are not the same thing." She felt the words settle inside her chest like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that spread outward and outward until they touched places inside her she had forgotten existed. Her breath came shallow. The rain drummed against the umbrella in a rhythm like a heartbeat. That evening, at Vincent's house on Mount Vernon Street, Lily found Clara in the kitchen and pressed a drawing into her hands. The paper was wrinkled, the colors applied with the urgent intensity of a 5-year-old who is trying to say something that matters. Two figures stood under an umbrella, one tall with dark hair, one small with blonde curls. The umbrella was blue. The rain was blue. Everything was blue except the two people, who were outlined in red crayon, their faces simple and serious. "This is you and me," Lily said. Her voice carried the absolute certainty of children. "You kept me safe on the worst night." Clara's hand shook as she held the drawing. She looked at Lily's face, small, solemn, waiting to see if Clara understood the gift that had just been given. And something inside her that had been locked away, frozen, untouchable, broke open like spring ice on a river. She sank to her knees and pulled Lily against her chest, and for the first time since Brennan's hands closed around her throat, she cried. The tears came in waves. Her whole body shook. Lily did not ask her to stop. The child simply held on, her small arms around Clara's neck, her drawing crumpled between them. Vincent stood in the doorway watching this happen, and in that moment, something shifted in his chest, a weight that had lived there since his father was murdered when he was 17, since he had buried himself under an empire of money and power and control. He realized he was not just protecting this girl anymore. Protection was something he had learned as an instrument of survival in his world. But this was something else entirely. This was the way a man's heart breaks open and reforms, stronger and more fragile at the same time. Lily fell asleep against Clara's shoulder. Vincent carried her upstairs. When he came back down, Carlo was waiting in the study with a ledger in his hands, his expression grim. "The Mocchetti family called," Carlo said. He was a broad-shouldered man with silver threading through his dark hair, and he had been Vincent's right hand for 15 years. "They want their 200,000 by the end of the week." Vincent took the ledger and studied the figures. His shipping routes depended on Mocchetti's cooperation. If the debt was not paid, they would move against his operations, seize containers, destroy shipments, cut off his access to the ports. 200 soldiers worked for him. Their families depended on that income. "If we do not pay," Carlo said slowly, "everything we built collapses." Vincent did not respond immediately. He looked at the numbers, at the weight of obligation represented in this single column of black ink. $200,000. He had that money. He had far more than that. But using it meant he could not give Clara the 300,000 he had promised, could not build her the new life she deserved. Carlo watched his face shift, watched him hesitate over money the way Carlo had never seen him hesitate in 15 years of working together. "In 15 years I have never seen you hesitate over money," Carlo said finally. Vincent closed the ledger. "Pay Mocchetti," he said. "Use the contingency fund. That depletes our reserves." "I know." That night, Vincent found Clara on the back terrace, wrapped in a coat that had belonged to his wife before she died. The city spread below them, Boston's lights reflecting off the Charles River, the harbor stretching toward the Atlantic, the entire world humming with life she had never been part of. Snow had begun to fall, light and tentative, as if the sky was trying to decide whether to commit to winter. "I need to tell you something," Vincent said. Clara turned to him. The falling snow caught in her dark hair, melted against her skin. "I have to use the money I promised you," he said. "There is a debt I cannot avoid. It will take time for me to get you the 300,000. It might take months." He watched her face to see if she would break, if she would ask him to choose her over his empire. He was prepared to do it. He had already made that decision internally, had already begun to contemplate what it would mean to step back, to let the younger men take over, to build something smaller and cleaner with this girl who had saved his daughter. But Clara did not ask him for anything. "Pay your debt," she said. Vincent started to argue, but she lifted her hand. "You saved me on the worst night of my life," she continued. "But I do not need $300,000. I need to know that someone believes I am worth saving even when I have nothing to offer back. You already gave me that." She moved closer to him, close enough that they were breathing the same air, close enough that he could see the small scar on her left cheekbone where Brennan's ring had cut her. "That is worth more than money." 1 month later, on a Tuesday evening at the Starlight Diner, Clara brought 2 cups of coffee to the corner booth where Vincent and Lily waited. The diner was warm and filled with the smell of grilled cheese and apple pie. Outside, the city moved forward into December. Inside, this small booth felt like the center of the world. Lily was drawing again, her tongue poking out in concentration as she colored. She looked up at Clara with absolute devotion in her young eyes. "You are my umbrella angel," she said. Clara sat beside them, not as a server but as someone who belonged there, and Vincent's hand found hers under the table. 2 weeks later, walking through Boston Common as snow fell in large, deliberate flakes, Clara stopped and looked up at the sky. "I used to think survival was enough," she said. "That if I could just make it through one more shift, one more day, one more night in the cold, I was winning." Vincent stopped walking. He turned to face her completely, the snow accumulating on his dark hair, on the shoulders of his coat. "And now?" he asked. Clara looked up at him, this man who controlled Boston's underworld, who had chosen to dismantle his finances for a girl who had nothing, who had learned to braid Lily's hair and read bedtime stories and sit with a terrified woman through the first night she believed she might be worth saving. "Now I think maybe living is different than surviving," she said. "Maybe it is about the moments when someone sees you at your worst and does not look away. When you have nothing and someone still chooses you. When you save someone not because you expect anything back, but because it is who you are." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her in the falling snow, and the world around them, the city, the cold, the past that had tried to destroy them both, fell away into irrelevance. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Clara chose to share her umbrella when she had nothing left. Vincent chose to protect a stranger when his empire hung in the balance. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is let someone else see our scars and believe we are still worth saving. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness is never wasted. Subscribe and turn on notifications because tomorrow we have another story about the moment everything changes. Comment below, have you ever helped a stranger and had it change your life? We read every comment. You matter. Your story matters. See you in the next one.